All right, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our Q3 webinar. My name is Sarah Grimes. I'm the Director of Business Development at NYSARC Trust Services, and we at NYSARC have been administering special needs trusts and helping people with disabilities be able to protect their financial eligibility for means-tested government benefits since 1972. We're excited to be offering this free webinar series to you all where we can talk about topics that will help you better understand trusts. And in today's session in particular, we're going to talk about trusts as well as ABLE accounts. We're going to talk about what are some of the unique advantages of each of these programs. And I'm going to try and answer a common question that I get, which is, do I need a trust or an ABLE account? And I think that the most important takeaway I hope you get from today's session is that it's not always either or. Sometimes you can use both of these programs to give someone the best quality of life possible. Now, before we jump in, just a reminder, everyone is muted just to keep background noise, and we do have the chat disabled. So if you have questions, please enter them into the Q&A. We do have closed captioning turned on, so you should be able to turn that on your end if you do need closed captioning. A link to the materials, so you will get a copy of these PowerPoint slides emailed to you. There will be an email that goes out tomorrow, so you'll receive the materials in about 24 hours, and we will have a recording available of this session posted on our website. Briefly, after today's webinar, you will receive a link to complete a brief survey for us. If you could please share your feedback and also other topics that you'd like us to present on in the future, we'd really appreciate your input. All right, so before we dive into talking about special needs trusts and ABLE accounts, I want to start with just a quick overview of the different types of government benefits that people with disabilities utilize. And in most cases, a person with a disability is often going to receive a variety of government benefits, and it's important to be able to identify which of those benefits is based on how much money they have in their name. And those benefits are referred to as means-tested benefits. These are things like supplemental security income, Medicaid, and can even be HUD housing benefits. And these are critical supports that provide essential services to people with disabilities. SSI gives them a monthly payment to be able to utilize for things like their housing expenses and other month-to-month needs. Medicaid is a form of health insurance that is going to allow them to access certain waiver programs and take advantage of things, services through OPWDD, for example. For individuals that receive these types of benefits, they can only have a certain amount of money in their name and qualify for these services. And so we're going to talk today about how we can use accounts to protect these benefits and allow someone to qualify for these benefits. In the case of someone getting SSI, they can never have more than $2,000. And their SSI, receiving SSI, just $1 of SSI, generally also qualifies them for Medicaid. So for a lot of people, their Medicaid eligibility is linked to that SSI eligibility. So it's very important that we keep their bank accounts below $2,000 in order to maintain these services. Now, there are other benefits that people with disabilities might utilize that are not based on a person's financial resources. Those are things like Social Security disability income. So if someone receives Social Security disability, that is an earned benefit. That is based on their ability to work and the fact that they paid into the system, and now they are collecting their Social Security benefit. So no amount of income or assets are going to cause them to lose that benefit. The only thing that can really affect Social Security disability is whether or not they are able to work and earn substantial gainful employment. That is something that can affect Social Security disability, but not how much money they have in their name. Another important benefit that we're going to focus on today is disabled adult child benefits, also commonly referred to as child disability benefits. This is an important benefit that individuals who are disabled prior to age 22 can access, where they receive money on their parents' work record. It can result in some extra income to them. It in and of itself is not means tested, but it can affect other benefits that someone's receiving. And then Medicare is another form of health insurance that a person with a disability can qualify for if they are receiving Social Security disability for 24 months or 2 years. And oftentimes we have people who are getting a mix of these benefits, right? They may be receiving Medicare for some of those basic health needs, but they still need Medicaid for those additional waiver services and programs that are offered, things like long-term care services or home care supports, people who are utilizing self-direction programs. And so there are situations where people will have both of these benefits. Now, I want to take a moment to just focus a little bit on DAC benefits because it is something that we're seeing more and more where people are having some difficulty navigating this and are running into issues with their benefit eligibility due to receipt of DAC benefits. So again, I want to highlight that this is a benefit that someone would be eligible for if they were disabled prior to the age of 22. And they start to be able to collect this Social Security benefit at the point where their parent chooses to retire, or if that parent becomes disabled and starts to collect Social Security disability, and also upon their parent's death. And this is where the child with a disability has the option to collect on their parent's work record. So this could be somebody who was receiving SSI benefits and they're living off of, around $900 a month. And now their parent retires or is deceased, and they can start collecting Social Security benefits based on that parent's, the amount of money that that parent worked and paid into the system. And so that can result in an increase in income to that individual. They're now getting extra money from Social Security each month. And that's a wonderful thing, right? It's helping them to pay for additional expenses, and now they have extra funds available to them. But it can cause an interruption in those other means tested services that they are receiving. So it's important to know that when someone is getting SSI and then starts to collect DAC, it can cause an interruption in that benefit. And it's important to do a few things to make sure that they can maintain eligibility for Medicaid services. So when someone's on SSI, if they are receiving SSI before DAC benefits come into effect, they are going to still need to as long as they maintain that $2,000 resource limit, they're going to be able to keep their Medicaid benefit. Now, even though they're getting extra income from Social Security, it might mean that they're no longer going to be getting the same amount from SSI or any amount of cash payment from SSI. But again, as long as they're keeping their bank accounts below $2,000, they will get to keep Medicaid benefits. It's a special rule we have in New York State that allows you to maintain that Medicaid eligibility. Now, if your assets go above $2,000, which is often happening because now you're collecting on your parents' work record, in some cases, this is thousands of dollars a month that you're receiving in income. And a lot of the people who are receiving this benefit are living in a residential setting where most of their basic needs are paid every month, and they don't necessarily have $3,000 a month in expenses. And so it's causing them to get very close to that $2,000 resource limit on a regular basis. So the solution is to reduce those countable assets. If you can reduce those assets by either purchasing things for that person, buying items and services that they need, or depositing those funds into something like a trust or an ABLE account, you can reinstate that SSI eligibility and as such also keeping the Medicaid benefit. Now, even if you do go over that resource limit, it just means that that income from DAC is now going to be treated as income. And so depending on how much you're receiving, it is possible that it could result in your income being too high for Medicaid. So if you're a person who is not working, then that means that now you're over the income limit for Medicaid. You have those two options. Just reduce your assets below $2,000 to reinstate Medicaid that way, or you can choose to deposit that excess income into a trust or a pooled trust to reduce that excess income and keep Medicaid services. So there are always ways to be able to maintain Medicaid eligibility in these situations. Now, if the person is working, you also have the option of changing what Medicaid benefit they receive. If a person loses their DAC budgeting eligibility because they're going over that $2,000 resource limit and they're not able to spend it down, or they don't want to have to spend it down below $2,000, and they're working, then you might want to think about applying for the Medicaid buy-in program for working people with disabilities. That program allows people to keep more in income, and so that can eliminate the need for a spend down. So those are some potential options when you run into those situations. And here are the limits to actually help to illustrate that a little bit more. So when we are talking about means tested benefits, we have to think about both the asset limits, which is money you can have available to you in the bank, money that can be easily turned into cash and used to pay for care, right? So it's checking accounts, savings accounts, CDs that are in your name, financial accounts that are in your name, most accounts outside of special needs trusts are ABLE accounts, right? And for people who are getting SSI, we have that $2,000 resource limit. If you choose to forego the SSI benefit, now you have just Medicaid. Or let's say, for example, you weren't on SSI before you started getting a DAC benefit. Now you're just on Social Security disability, like we talked about earlier. That's not means tested, but maybe you're getting Medicaid. And so you have to keep your assets below $32,396, right? And again, depending on someone's situation, you probably are well below that resource limit for Medicaid. And so this would be a good fit in situations where someone might be coming into a larger sum of money. And there is a new net family asset limit for HUD recipients, people who are in a Section 8 housing, of $100,000. Something just to be mindful of. This is a new benefit. And of course, a trust is a solution. If you receive funds that are going to put you over that asset limit, you're able to deposit them into a special needs trust so that they're not counted towards that asset limit. Now, we also have to look at the income limits. So for a person that's receiving SSI, they're typically not going to be over the income limit for Medicaid. But it is when they start receiving perhaps those DAC benefits that their income might be higher than that, right? And so this is where, as long as we keep those resources below $2,000, we keep Medicaid without having to worry about being over that income limit. But if you're someone who's receiving Social Security disability and now you start getting DAC, you may be above that Medicaid limit. So that's, again, where we want to look at either depositing those funds into a trust on a monthly basis to spend down the income and allow you to keep Medicaid services. Or you could look at that Medicaid buy-in program where someone can earn significantly higher wages and eliminate the spend down that way. And there are slightly higher limits if you are married and both receiving services, but it's not double. So it's important to keep those in mind as well. So this creates a challenge for people with disabilities. And obviously, there are the DAC benefit issues, but there are many other reasons why someone may have a need to offload some money into a trust or an ABLE account. It could be unexpected windfalls. So these are things where someone leaves you an inheritance, they didn't realize you were on government benefits. Having that money directly in your name is going to potentially put you over those asset limits. Sometimes you're applying for SSI and you've been, in the waiting period for a while, and now you're going to get a lump sum check for the months that you were technically eligible but weren't yet approved. So those retroactive benefit checks can cause an influx of money available to you in your name. And it can be other things like settlements, windfalls from lottery winnings, just gifts from people that can create these types of issues. We talked a lot about the DAC issue. That is something where funds are accumulating in your bank account, right? So money is just building up, and now you're going over that asset limit, whether it's for Medicaid or for SSI. Primarily, it's going to be individuals who are getting SSI because it's very difficult to keep your bank accounts below $2,000 in these situations. And it can also be when people are working, right? You're working, you're earning some money, you're still eligible to receive Social Security, supplemental security income benefits, but you're not spending your stuff, right? Again, in these situations, we do want to look at, are there appropriate things that we can purchase for this person to help keep them below that limit? But sometimes it can benefit them to set that money aside and allow it to build up over time. Trusts are a great solution when you are going to be determined to be over those Medicaid limits, right? So if you have a spend down for Medicaid, your options are to pay that money to the county each month. Now, that does allow you to keep Medicaid services, but it means that you no longer have that money available to you to pay for expenses and to help to supplement the services that you get from government benefits. So putting that spend down into a trust allows you to have that money available to you and allows you to make purchases that maybe you wouldn't otherwise be able to, access services that you wouldn't otherwise be able to because there are things that are not provided through your public benefits. And of course, we also want to think about anytime we're thinking about the future of a person with a disability who might receive means tested benefits. Parents, grandparents who are thinking about leaving money to a child with a disability should really be thinking about setting that up in a trust rather than giving them money directly. Doing that is going to potentially cause an interruption in their benefits, and then it means they're going to have to set up their own trust with that money. And it's more favorable for them to set that up in a trust that's for that person's benefit. And we'll talk about that as we go through some of the details about special needs trusts and the different types of trusts. So the solution in these situations, the great news is that there are options. People do not need to impoverish themselves in order to qualify for these benefits and to be able to maintain eligibility for these benefits. We can use special needs trusts, and now we have the wonderful addition of the ABLE accounts as a way to help people spend down funds when they're in these situations and set them aside for future needs, right? We can help them maintain their government benefits and have additional money available to them that's going to give them a better quality of life. It's going to allow them to have financial means available to them to pay for things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to. It means they can save for the future and not worry about how it's going to affect. People can work and not be worried about how much they're earning or whether or not they're going to get a bonus that year that might impact their eligibility for benefits, right? Working is very important. Allowing people with disabilities to be able to participate in their communities. Work provides social opportunities and a lot of benefits for individuals. So we want to be able to encourage people to continue working and be able to set aside some of that earnings for their future needs. And of course, it's going to potentially give someone better financial stability long term, especially if we have situations where parents are able to set up trusts for the benefit of their child so that it can provide for things that their government benefits don't. So now we're going to talk just a little bit of background on each of these programs and highlight some of the unique advantages of each of them. So special needs trusts are a legal arrangement. This is an legally allowable both under federal and state statute as a means for people with disabilities to protect money that's in their own name, as well as money that that they may be entitled to receive. And putting funds into a special needs trust, as long as it is a qualified special needs trust, will protect their financial eligibility for Medicaid, for SSI, and even those HUD benefits. When you put money into a special needs trust, it becomes the property of that trust, and it is managed by a trustee. That trustee is responsible for holding on to those assets and managing them on behalf of the individual with a disability. Now, if it is a pooled trust, it's going to be managed by a nonprofit organization. If you are setting up a trust on your own with an attorney, you're going to select your own trustee. And that trustee is going to have a fiduciary duty to use those funds in the best interest of the person who's receiving means-tested government benefits. The primary purpose of setting up these accounts is to help someone be able to qualify and maintain their financial eligibility for services and give them additional funds that are going to help supplement those benefits. And so it's very important that the trustee understands the rules of the government benefits that the person with disabilities is receiving. because we need to make sure that that trustee is going to make appropriate distributions from the trust that will not affect government benefits. That's the other important piece. Putting the money into the trust is one form of protection. And then you need to make sure that you're properly distributing the funds out of the account to also avoid any sort of reductions or impact on government benefits. So we have to understand what your SSI or your Medicaid benefits are supposed to provide so that we don't pay for those things out of the trust and then inadvertently affect negatively your government benefits. Now, the trust can pay for most things that are for the primary benefit of this person above and beyond what they receive from their government benefits. And it's very unique to each person. So it's going to be, very individualized, and it's also going to be based on the type of trust that they are using. When you are putting in income each month to spend down for Medicaid purposes, it depends on your living situation, but often we're using those funds for your monthly expenses. If you're in a residential program where most of your basic living needs are met, then maybe we're not using it so much for your monthly bills, but we might be using it more for quality of life things, for you to be able to pursue hobbies, for you to be able to access services that aren't covered by Medicaid, or other benefits that you're getting. Maybe it's for you to take an annual vacation, right? So there's lots of different ways that we can use these funds, and it is very unique to each person and what they want or need. Now, there's different types of special needs trusts. The primary structure of special needs trust is either funded with a person's own money, and that's referred to as a first-party trust or a self-settled trust. And the important thing to know about a first-party trust is when you're putting your own money into it, it is subject to Medicaid payback when you die. And so there are different ways that a trust may satisfy that payback provision in the trust. And that's going to be based on, whether it's on its own or it's a pooled trust. And we'll talk about that. But if the person has to put their own money into it, Medicaid wants to be able to repay from that trust for the services that were provided to that person during their lifetime. Which is why it's important that if you have a parent or a grandparent that wants to leave an inheritance to their child, that they think about doing that in a third-party trust. This is where it's funded by someone other than the person who's receiving services. And by doing that, there is no Medicaid payback at death. So if you leave an inheritance to your loved one directly and they have to set up their own trust in order to protect it, it means that that money will not be able to go to anyone else or may not be able to go to anyone else upon that individual's death. With a third-party trust, your loved one will have the ability to use it throughout their lifetime for the things that they want or need. And you can designate the other people or the charity that you would like that money to go to after they've had the opportunity to use it. Now, trust can also be set up on your own with an attorney, as long as someone is under the age of 65. If it's a first-party trust, if you're funding it with your own money, you can only make contributions to this type of trust up until the age of 65. But if it's a person who's setting it up for a third party, you can do this at any time. You're going to work with the attorney to draft a trust, whether if you're funding it during your lifetime, or it may be drafted into your will or your estate planning documents if you're intending to fund it upon your death. And that's typically going to require that those documents are submitted to the Medicaid and Social Security Administration to be approved, because it's an individual document. And so it gives you some flexibility to be able to dictate the terms of the trust and to be able to name your selected trustees. It is important that if you are choosing trustees that you want to have backups as well, because you want to make sure whoever you're named, if they're unable to serve at some point, that you want to have backups in place for those situations. Now, a pooled trust is going to give you kind of all of those things in one place. A pooled trust is managed by a nonprofit organization, so you do not need to select a trustee, and you don't have to worry about naming backups. This is an organization that is going to serve as the trustee throughout your child's lifetime. You can open a pooled trust even after the age of 65. You can put funds into it if you're a first party needing to set up a first party trust even after the age of 65. But there are some limitations there, depending on the types of benefits you receive. Those deposits after 65 could be subject to some transfer penalties. And with a pooled trust, you're just applying to join an existing program. And so there's no requirement to draft a trust in most cases. Those documents are already in place. They've generally already been submitted to Medicaid and Social Security Administration. In NYSARC's case, all of our documents have been approved in every county of New York, so that someone can simply apply to join and they can open up this trust account very quickly. And that can be a great benefit when you've got somebody who's receiving money and needs to get it spent down before the start of the next month, right? So a pooled trust can be a great fit in those situations. A pooled trust is also a great fit when you're looking for that professional support, where you want to have that longevity plan of having a trustee that's going to be in place for the lifetime of the beneficiary, and not have to worry about naming those backups. You're also getting the benefit of working with a nonprofit organization that understands the government benefits, and this is solely a service that they provide, right? Is staying up to date on those laws. And so it can relieve your family of having to have that day-to-day management of the account, having to report to government agencies, and they can still be very involved. They can still be contacts on the account. They can still communicate with the nonprofit to let them know what someone may want or need, but they don't have to take it on those day-to-day legal responsibilities of serving as a trustee. Sorry. So once you've decided that someone may be in need of a trust, and I do want to mention, I did see a hand raised. We do have everybody muted, so please put any questions you have into the Q&A, and we will reserve some time at the end to go through those. So trust can be established by the individual if it's for their own funds, but it can also be established by a parent or grandparent, a legal guardian, someone who's acting as power of attorney. And in a situation where you have someone who does not have the capacity to open their own trust, and they do not have a living parent or grandparent or legal guardian or power of attorney, we can petition to the court to be able to set up a special needs trust. So important for people to be aware of kind of who can set these trusts up when you've identified someone who may need one. I want to make sure that we distinguish that in some situations, you may have a parent, a living parent, who can establish and execute the documents to set up a trust, but the parent may not be in control of the funds. Maybe you have an organizational rep payee managing the funds that may need to be put into the trust. And so in that case, you can use both of those representatives to establish the trust. The parent can execute the documents, and the rep payee can fund the account with Social Security funds only. But a rep payee cannot establish the trust on behalf of the person. They do not have the signature authority to establish a special needs trust for someone. So that means in the case of a pooled trust, they can't sign the joinder agreement, but they can fund the account if you have someone else who can execute that document. Now, when it comes to the things that we can pay for, again, it's generally bills in that person's name, items and services that are for that individual. There are some limitations for us with trusts. If you are receiving SSI, we can't pay for your rent or your housing expenses without potentially reducing SSI. But beyond that, as we mentioned, there's a lot of examples here on the slide. There are so many things that we can pay for, and it really is unique to each person. There are some things that we cannot do with the funds in a special needs trust. We can never give this person cash out of the account. We can never give them money into their bank account. If you could access the money in this trust by withdrawing money out of it or getting cash, it would be considered your money. So it wouldn't provide the protections for the government benefits. So we can't do that, but we can pay for expenses that are for you. So we can make distributions to third parties to pay your bills or to reimburse someone who bought something for you. We can't buy gifts for other people. The funds in this trust should be for your primary benefit. And then certain trustees are going to have different policies. For example, NYSERC doesn't pay for alcohol, tobacco, firearms, bail, or restitution. Now, if you have somebody who has a trust and they would like to be able to buy alcohol at dinner or, cigarettes, doesn't mean that they cannot buy those things. It just simply means the trust will not pay for them and they can use the funds that they have outside of the trust for those expenses. We can pay a bill that they would otherwise use their SSI money or their SSDI money for so that they have that available to buy gifts for their grandchildren or make other purchases that may not be eligible for the trust. And the trust under federal policy will close upon the death of the beneficiary, and no disbursements can be made before we repay Medicaid in the case of a first-party trust. And so in a first-party trust situation, typically you're going to, look to find out how much the Medicaid lien is first and repay that before any funds could go to remainder beneficiaries. If it's a pooled trust, the pooled trust will typically retain those funds as the nonprofit will keep the money that's in the account and use it to benefit other people with disabilities that are served by their mission, rather than repaying the state with those funds. And it does depend in those situations. We do have some programs if it's funded with over $250,000 when you get started, that we will look to see if we can repay the lien first. And if we are able to pay off any outstanding lien, NYSERC will only retain a small percentage, and then the rest could go to other individuals that you put into the document. So one of the biggest questions I get about special needs trusts is, how do we actually use the account? How does my loved one access the funds once they're protected in the trust? So you can always make deposits into the trust. You can make them typically electronically from your bank account, or you can fund the trust by check. You can make one-time deposits and you can make recurring deposits over time if you have a spend down and you need to make a deposit every month. And also if you have money that's just building up in your bank account, you can make deposits throughout the year as you need to. And there's no limit on how much you can put into a special needs trust. There's also no limit on how much you can have in your special needs trust. And there's no limit on how many special needs trusts you can have. So you may have a trust that was set up by your parents, and then you may also have your own trust when you have a need to spend down your own funds. When you want to access the money in the account, you're going to submit requests to the trustees for items and services that are for your primary benefit. And you need to provide some form of receipt or documentation of what you're asking the trust to pay for. That's a Medicaid and Social Security Administration rule that we as a trustee need to follow. And so if you are serving as a trustee of a special needs trust, you need to make sure you are documenting every distribution from the trust. It's also very important that we review that documentation to make sure that the funds are in fact being used for this person. We can pay your landlord for the rent. We can pay your electric company for the electric bill. You can put purchases on a credit card, and you can submit that credit card statement with the receipts for the things you'd like the trust to pay, and we can pay the credit card debt, right? So that is going to allow you to go out and have money available to spend and make purchases as you need them. And then you're just submitting a credit card statement to the trust, and the trust is going to pay off that credit card debt. Again, we cannot give you cash or reimburse your checking account if you bought things out of your checking account. Now, if that happens, it's not the end of the world. Contact the trust. We can find something else that we could pay for that's going to free up some of your money outside of the trust. And we can pay a family member or any other third party who's willing to buy something on your behalf, as long as they give us proof of payment. And if you have expenses that are the same amount every month, we can set those up to be paid automatically. You can tell us what day of the month you want them to be paid, and we can set up a recurring payment, and then you can update us if anything changes. In our program, you have many ways to submit these requests to us. You can send them to us through our online portal. We have a 24/7 online portal available. It's like an online bank account where you can view the balance in your trust. You can track the activity. You can download the documents and forms you need to manage the account, and you can make disbursement requests and upload the supporting documents. That is the fastest way to get bills processed. It also allows people and family members to help someone manage their trust account from anywhere. And if you don't like computers or you don't want to use the portal, you also have the option to email, fax, or mail your request to the trust. Now, ABLE accounts. ABLE accounts are an additional tool that we have available to people with disabilities. These became available through legislation in 2014, and I think the first program actually opened in 2015. So relatively new, and we want to make sure people are aware of this option in situations where people have a need to spend down excess resources. And that's really important to point out that an ABLE account can only be used to reduce countable resources or assets. It cannot be used to reduce your income for Medicaid. That's only a trust can help you do that. So ABLE accounts are tax advantage savings accounts, allowing people with disabilities to set aside up to, as of this year, $19,000 a year for qualified disability expenses. And the qualified disability expenses are very broad categories. We'll talk a little bit more on the next slide. But generally, it's expenses that are going to help to improve the health and the independence and someone's quality of life, right? It's generally individual to each person because it is specific to their disability and their needs. In order to be eligible for an ABLE account today, you have to have onset of disability prior to age 26. Now that has kind of limited the people that can use ABLE accounts, and that age of eligibility is increasing to 46 starting on the 1st of the coming year. So January 1st of 2026, people whose onset of disability before age 46 are now going to be eligible to open up ABLE accounts. So that is a huge benefit, is going to expand the pool of people who are eligible to use ABLE accounts, particularly will affect people like who have had TBIs later in life, physical disabilities, and those who might just not have had documentation that early on of their disability. So this is a huge news that we're very excited about. Now, you can contribute up to $19,000 a year into these accounts from any source. So that means if a person with a disability is putting their own money in, and then you also have a third party putting money in, you collectively can only put $19,000 a year. And it's typically in line with the gift tax limit for each year. So in 2026, that limit will go up slightly. And for someone on SSI, they do need to keep their balance below $100,000 in order to maintain SSI eligibility. Any dollars above the $100,000 is going to be treated as an available resource. And there are people with disabilities who are working and contributing to a retirement account do have the ability to contribute a little bit more into an ABLE account on an annual basis. And that is based on the federal poverty level compared to what your income is. And so those limits are unique to each person. But it's important to be thinking about if you are working, because putting money into a retirement account can be considered an available resource to someone. So once you reach a certain balance, you're going to potentially run into issues with your Medicaid or your SSI eligibility. And so an ABLE account may be a good alternative to funding a retirement account, but it may also, in some cases, for people with disabilities that do not get means tested benefits, it can also be a way for them to maximize what they can put into retirement. If you don't have to worry about resource limits for Medicaid or SSI, and you have a disability and you're working, you can max out your retirement account for the year, and you can also make contributions to an ABLE account. And that's going to allow you to really increase your ability to save for retirement down the road. So that's another great benefit to an ABLE account, even for people who are not getting means tested benefits. So ABLE accounts can be set up by the individual with a disability, that eligible person, and it can also be set up by someone with signature authority. So that's generally going to be, a parent, a grandparent, a guardian. ABLE accounts can be set up by rep payees as long as they have signature authority and can place those benefits into the ABLE account. And so that is another, great solution if you have a situation where someone may need to spend down resources, but you don't have any appropriate individuals who can set up a special needs trust. looking at an ABLE account might be a potential solution in those situations. But you can only have one ABLE account. So that's important to keep in mind. If you have one, you have to manage that. The only time you can have more than one is when you are transitioning to a new program. So you're only able to maintain that one ABLE account. And unlike trusts, there's no distinction between first-party money and third-party money in an ABLE account. All of that money will be subject to a Medicaid payback upon the death of the beneficiary, even money that was put in by a third party. So if you are a parent or a grandparent who is putting money into an ABLE account for their child, that doesn't mean it's not a good idea. It just means that you should be making deposits that your child intends to spend during their lifetime. And if you want to be able to make significant deposits and have significant funds available to your child, perhaps setting up a third-party trust might be a better option, because it's also going to give them more flexibility if they have a need to fund the ABLE account, right? Because it's a collective contribution limit. So that's something to be keeping in mind for planning purposes. And as I mentioned, ABLE accounts have to be used for qualified disability expenses, but the categories are very broad, right? As you can see here, it is most things that are for their benefit. It's going to be their household bills, their basic living needs. And one of the great benefits, as you see it's highlighted on the screen, is that ABLE accounts can pay for housing without affecting a person's SSI. So that is huge. That means that as a trustee, we can even take some funds and transfer them to an ABLE account to be able to pay someone's rent out of that ABLE account without affecting or reducing what they get from SSI. So that's a huge benefit, and a way that special needs trusts and ABLE accounts can work together to get someone into a better living situation and avoid it affecting or reducing their SSI payment. And then, of course, like I said, it's very unique to each person and their type of disability. These categories are intentionally broad so that it allows someone to be able to use these funds flexibly. And when it comes to the actual management of these accounts, another unique thing about ABLE accounts is that they are actually managed by that individual. The account holder is going to have direct access to that money, and they're going to have control over that account. And so that can be a major plus when you think about the flexibility and being able to access funds when you need them. But it also holds some risks, right? Because there isn't a trustee that's overseeing it. So there, this is, needs to maybe have, be responsible with their finances. You have to keep in mind, are they susceptible to people trying to get access to the money in that account? So it is really important to consider that. You can put money into an ABLE account now in a checking account. So you hold the funds just in a checking account. You can now, a lot of ABLE accounts have savings account options, and then they also have options for you to invest some of those funds. And that's a great benefit to the ABLE accounts as well. So it gives you some flexibility there with that management. But it is up to this individual, the account holder, or whoever is the person with that signature authority that is managing the account on their behalf. They have to self-certify any questions related to what they spent the funds on. So you want to make sure that you're keeping receipts and you're maintaining documentation, just like you would be with a trust. The difference is just with the trust, you'd be sending that to the trustee, and the trustee would be responsible for keeping track of all that information and reporting to government agencies. With the ABLE account, you're going to need to keep track of that yourself. And you're going to need to report if you are audited by the IRS. That's another difference between ABLE accounts and special needs trusts. ABLE accounts are overseen by the IRS. So you're reporting, to the IRS. And if you use the ABLE account for a non-qualified disability expense, it's a tax consequence. You may have to pay taxes on that money, because an ABLE account is tax-free going into the account, and it grows tax-free in the account as long as it is spent on qualified disability expenses. So again, another major benefit to the ABLE account is that if you make a wrong move with how you use the ABLE account, it's a tax implication rather than impacting your government benefits. So that's another really great benefit to the ABLE account. So just to summarize, before we open things up to questions, I want to just kind of lay out a quick comparison between special needs trusts and ABLE accounts and kind of summarize what we've spoken about today. So again, special needs trusts and ABLE accounts have different requirements when it comes to eligibility, right? A special needs trust, you just have to have a qualifying disability. It doesn't matter how old you were when you became disabled. And if you use a pooled trust, you can even make deposits of your own money after the age of 65. With an ABLE account, there is that age 26 age limit currently. It's going to go up to 46 on January 1st of the coming year. With special needs trusts, you can have many special needs trusts. You don't have to only maintain one account as long as it's managed by a trustee. And then with an ABLE account, you can just have that one because they need to keep track of the contributions and the balances. Special needs trusts can be used to protect resources as well as income. So if you have a need to reduce countable resources, you can deposit them into a trust. If you have excess income for Medicaid, you can deposit it into a special needs trust or a pooled trust. ABLE accounts are resources only. You cannot deposit or eliminate a Medicaid spend down in an ABLE account. Special needs trusts, we have no limit on how much you can put into them. There's no limit on the contributions. So a special needs trust can be a good fit if you're getting a larger windfall. And there's no limit on how much money you can keep in that account. Where ABLE accounts are going to have an annual contribution limit, and that is from any source, first party and third party. SSI recipients have to keep their balances below $100,000. Otherwise, additional funds above that $100,000 could cause a reduction in SSI benefits. And in New York State, if you're using the New York ABLE program, you cannot make any further contributions once your balance reaches $520,000. Now that is in line with because these ABLE accounts are modeled after the 529 savings accounts. So again, that limit could change over time, but it just simply means that you can no longer contribute to the account. The account could still grow based on investments and things in the account. Also important to point out, I should have mentioned this in the previous slide, you can roll a 529 account into an ABLE account if you invested in a 529 account for someone that didn't end up going to college. Special needs trusts, if it is a larger sum of money or you're putting in resources, those funds are invested into the market, and so they are subject to market fluctuation. Investment options can be flexible and depending on how your trust is structured, you may be managing that with your own financial manager, or in the case of a pooled trust, they typically align themselves with a financial institution that's going to perform the investments in the account. And those funds do not grow tax-free. So that is something that annually the trustee will be responsible for filing taxes for the trust. And if there are taxes that are owed, those are typically deducted from the trust account balance, where the ABLE account is tax-free going in and tax-free coming out, as long as you are using it for qualified disability expenses. And the investment options may be a little bit more limited, is where you have kind of buckets you can invest in. It's a bit more self-directed, and you may have limitations on how many times a year you can make changes to that. Where a special needs trust, the trustee or the financial manager of the trust funds that are in the trust is going to be kind of constantly looking at those investments and constantly positioning that trust to try and be able to give it the best opportunity possible. With special needs trusts, we have a payback provision for Medicaid if it's a person's own money, but there is no payback to Medicaid if it's a third party's money. Where with the ABLE account, all funds in that account will be subject to Medicaid payback, even funds that were contributed by a third party. So really important to keep that in mind. So in summary, when are we going to choose which trust in these situations, right? So special needs trusts are going to be a great fit when we're talking larger windfalls, right? If you're getting $100,000, it's going to be well above that $19,000 contribution limit, right? And of course, there are situations where you could put some money into the ABLE and some money into a special needs trust. Special needs trusts are going to be the right fit when you have excess monthly income, maybe when you're making deposits from a third party, And if you are looking for a professional trustee, a pooled trust or a special needs trust may be a better fit. When you want to have somebody with some oversight of the distributions of the trust and helping assist with making sure that those funds are used appropriately and wisely for that individual. ABLE accounts are going to be ideal for everyday spending, someone who can self-manage their own account, who wants that flexibility of direct access to the funds. And it's also going to be potentially lower costs as opposed to working with a professional trustee for a special needs trust. But as we've spoken about, it's really important that we use all of these tools as we can because they complement each other so well as a way to help maximize benefit protection for people and give them more funds available to them to improve their quality of life.